Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. The first thing you need to know tonight is simple. A house that should have been full of answers chose silence. Cohoes, New York. Sunday morning, September 14th, 2025. Officers enter a tidy single-family home on Earl Lynn Court for a welfare check. The living room is undisturbed, the kitchen counter's clear, mail stacked in a neat pile. In the back, a 41-year-old woman, Amanda Rodriguez, is found beyond help. Sharp force injuries to the chest. The medical examiner will later summarize the cause in clinical terms. Hemorrhagic shock from multiple stab wounds. No adjectives can add clarity to that. What matters now is what can be measured, logged, and preserved. Scene control starts at the door. One entry, one exit, gloves on, body-worn cameras rolling as policy allows. A paper and digital log for every person who crosses the threshold. Lights are left as found. Windows are photographed before any shade is touched. Detectives map the room with laser measurement, collect latent prints where surfaces make sense, and protect a short list of high-value items for DNA, door hardware, light switches, and anything that suggests close contact. The home doesn't read like a ransack. Drawers aren't dumped, cushions aren't flipped. If there was a struggle, it wasn't the kind that scatters the house. Here is the first operational anomaly. This residence has an indoor smart camera. It should have given investigators a time-stamped view of anyone who crossed the hallway. Instead, there is a gap. The device mounts to a common brand. The base is intact. The battery compartment shows signs of recent handling. That observation goes into the log, not as a conclusion, but as a lead. When cameras go dark at the critical hour, detectives rebuild the missing minutes from everything else. Router logs, motion sensors, neighboring doorbells, utility usage, and the simple geometry of blood and movement. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. Victimology begins in parallel, not after. Amanda's week is reconstructed from workplace contacts, phone records requested through proper legal process, and neighbor canvasses. Investigators document her routines without turning her life into speculation. Who she called, where she shopped, how often her porch light came on. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The goal here isn't to dramatize, it's to narrow risk, identify opportunity, and set the clock. A second anomaly appears when officers check points of ingress. No obvious forced entry is visible at first pass. That doesn't end the question. Forced entry can be subtle, but it shifts the working theory. If an offender didn't break in, the next question is how they got inside and why the camera has no record of it. By late afternoon, the home is sealed under warrant. The medical examiner transports Amanda for autopsy. Evidence techs package what the court will later see described in sterile phrases. Outside, the block stays quiet. Inside, the timeline starts to harden around a Saturday morning window and the fact that a camera went mute when the house needed a witness. The next step is not dramatic, it's discipline. You rebuild a weekend minute by minute and decide what counts. For Amanda Rodriguez, the working spine forms fast. Discovery on Sunday, September 14th, 2025. An alleged offense window around Saturday morning, roughly 8:20 a.m. as later cited in charging documents. Everything else gets tested against those two anchors. What fits stays, what wanders gets cut. Victimology comes first, but only the parts that drive risk. Work rhythm, routine stops, who she texted near week's end, any known plans for Saturday. Detectives take statements, pull doorbell footage from the block, and secure the legal process for device records. This is not commentary on her life. It's a filter for opportunity and proximity. If a pattern changed, there's a reason. If nothing changed, that also says something. The medical examiner's preliminary confirms what was visible at the scene without adding spectacle. Multiple sharp force injuries to the chest, hemorrhagic shock. No weapon is named at this stage. Time of injury is narrowed enough to line up with the Saturday window, which matters because it collapses the search to a small slice of the weekend. That single bracket, Saturday morning versus any other period, drives the next round of subpoenas and canvasses. It also removes noise. Friday night social traffic is less relevant. Late Sunday morning is not the moment the harm occurred. Digital triage runs alongside the autopsy work. Investigators secure the residence network hardware and note the obvious lead already documented, the indoor camera that did not capture the critical minutes. Rather than rehash that gap, they widen the perimeter. They asked for neighboring systems with overlapping fields of view. They checked delivery routes for dash cameras. They traced typical investigative paths for phones and vehicles using lawful process. The data is not expected to resolve motive in a day. It is expected to tighten the clock. Inside the house, the absence of ransack still holds. That doesn't answer intent, but it keeps the focus on contact. Someone had to be close, inside the same rooms Amanda used every day. If there was a point of entry that looked routine, it's noted without declaring how consent did or didn't work. That question belongs to court later. The job here is to keep a clean chain and not outrun the facts. By late evening on Sunday, case management reflects a simple but important forensic discovery: the first hard bracket on time. The medical window and the allegation in the charging paperwork point to early Saturday. That changes the canvas list. It changes who is worth finding on a quiet cul-de-sac and which businesses might hold footage that hasn't yet looped. It changes what a bank receipt means and whether a store visit matters. You can spend days wandering a weekend. Now the team doesn't have to. There is a human cost in this kind of precision, and it isn't showy. Families want why. Investigators need when. In small cities like Cohoes, murders don't just break laws, they break routines, and routines are how you find people. The work here respects both realities: the need to speak plainly with loved ones, and the need to write clean warrants that a judge can trust. It's not television. It's a process that either holds in court or doesn't. As the clock narrows, one more thought sits in the notes: the data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem. When every piece points to the same window, you double-check the sources to make sure one assumption didn't drag the others behind it. That's not doubt about the victim or the science, it's discipline before you press forward. It ends with a usable window and a plan to push outward from it: requests for records, prioritized canvases, and the first restraint of the weekend's noise. The next hard anchor will come from outside the house. When it does, it should either confirm the clock or challenge it. Either answer is useful. By the morning of September 15, 2025, Albany County detectives had a time window and a silent camera, but no suspect in custody. What they did have was movement. A pickup truck registered to someone close to Amanda Rodriguez found more than 150 miles north, deep in the Adirondacks. The truck wasn't hidden. It was left on a narrow rural stretch near Brighton, a place where logging roads and forest trails run for miles with no surveillance coverage. Inside, investigators noted the ignition off, doors unlocked, and signs of quick departure. The discovery transformed a contained homicide scene into a statewide search. Standard procedure called for coordination with the New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation. They launched the manhunt formally that Monday. Drones, K-9 units, and aviation teams mapped a radius around the truck. Local residents were briefed to lock doors, report sightings, and preserve any video from private cameras or trail systems. These searches aren't dramatic in person, just grids, checklists, and slow sweeps through dense terrain, but each hour matters because Adirondack nights in mid-September drop into the 40s and a person on foot can disappear into miles of cover. Evidence technicians processed the truck in daylight. They found basic identifiers: registration, open glove box, a cell phone mount with no phone, and clothing consistent with late summer travel. Nothing about the vehicle indicated theft or outside tampering. No obvious blood traces were visible. Luminol tests were scheduled, but initial results were neutral. The absence of a weapon there didn't end the line of inquiry. It simply meant the primary implement wasn't left behind. The real value came from digital forensics. The vehicle's onboard system recorded mileage and last ignition time. Those timestamps suggested it had been parked since late Sunday, within a window that tracked closely to Amanda's estimated time of death. From a procedural standpoint, the truck's location created probable cause to expand the jurisdictional perimeter. Warrants extended to adjacent counties for fuel receipts and surveillance feeds from gas stations along the Northway corridor. Investigators began pulling toll data and highway license plate reader hits. Each confirmed one thing: the vehicle had traveled north soon after the Saturday morning window and had not been moved since. That alignment between homicide timing and vehicle placement was the first verifiable connection between the home in Cohoes and the woods of Franklin County. Forensic mapping specialists used that distance to outline what survival on foot would look like. A person leaving that site would have had access to multiple state land trails, water sources, and seasonal cabins. Search commanders briefed that such conditions favored a short-term hiding pattern, not an indefinite evasion. Yet nothing in law enforcement guarantees quick resolution. Wooded areas near Paul Smith's college have absorbed search teams before, sometimes for weeks. The discovery of the truck also introduced new logistical questions. If the driver abandoned it willingly, what was the exit method? Another vehicle, assistance, or foot travel? No second vehicle impressions were confirmed nearby, and canine tracks indicated movement west toward the tree line. Drone heat imaging on day 2 picked up transient signatures, campfire residue, disturbed ground, but nothing that met threshold for confirmation. What investigators could say with confidence was that the person they were looking for had time to prepare and knowledge of the region. That suggested familiarity, not random flight. Public communication remained cautious. The Cohoes Police Department issued a brief statement confirming the vehicle discovery and stating the search's multi-agency nature. They avoided releasing any personal identifiers pending arraignment. That restraint wasn't about secrecy, it was legal hygiene. In active homicide cases, premature release can jeopardize admissibility of statements and the integrity of lineup procedures later. Behind the official tone, the pressure was clear. The homicide of a woman in a quiet residential area had now tied to a manhunt stretching across New York State. For local investigators used to domestic disputes or property crimes, the shift from neighborhood policing to wilderness search changed everything. Each update from the north fed a mixture of urgency and realism. The longer a person stays missing in open terrain, the higher the chance they reappear only by choice or accident. There's a practical truth in homicide work. Most offenders run, but few disappear. You can trace money, fuel, movement, and fear. One of them always leaves a mark. The challenge now was to find which of those would surface first. By day 4 of the investigation, the manhunt stretched from Albany County to the northern edge of the Adirondacks. But investigators knew that wilderness alone doesn't hide a person for long. Digital traces always outlast footsteps. What couldn't be seen from the air could be found in data. Detectives focused on the missing phone. Amanda's messages had stopped abruptly at 8:17 a.m. on Saturday, minutes before her estimated time of death. From cell tower logs and carrier subpoenas, analysts confirmed that another device registered to Anthony Bechand had disconnected from the same area within an hour. That correlation wasn't yet proof, but it was enough to chart a path. The phone's last active ping traced north, hitting a series of towers along Interstate 87, each stop shorter and more deliberate until the signal vanished near Saranac Lake. When the truck was found there a day later, the pattern aligned perfectly. The digital trail didn't end with the phones. Investigators examined transaction data. A gas purchase timestamped Saturday at 10:06 a.m. appeared on Bechand's bank record at a station just south of Tupper Lake. The security footage from that store, obtained with a court order, showed a man in a gray hoodie and baseball cap fueling a dark pickup. His face wasn't fully visible, but his build and clothing matched earlier social photos of Bechand from Amanda's phone gallery. No weapon was in sight, but that wasn't what detectives were after. They were documenting movement, one verifiable step at a time. Search teams used that timeline to adjust their perimeter. Instead of spreading wide, they followed the corridor of gas stops, campgrounds, and trailheads running west of Route 30. Within days, hikers reported hearing faint rustling near an abandoned lean-to, too organized to be wildlife. They found a tarp, energy bar wrappers, and a torn receipt from a local store. The receipt timestamp matched another transaction from Bechand's debit card 2 days after the homicide. He was alive, moving cautiously, but leaving behind evidence of planning and familiarity with the area. Forensic specialists studying Amanda's home synced this digital pattern with what was already recovered on site. No forced entry suggested the victim knew her attacker. The missing weapon, the silent camera, and the controlled crime scene all pointed to deliberate staging. When matched with the travel data, the theory grew stronger. The person who killed Amanda left quickly, intentionally, and with a route mapped in advance. By September 26th, 12 days after Amanda's death, a state trooper spotted movement along a lakeside clearing near Brighton. A man matching Bechand's description emerged from the woods carrying a backpack and attempted to approach a nearby cabin. The trooper identified himself. The man fled, but was cornered within minutes by backup units. He was detained without incident. Inside his bag were basic camping supplies, a prepaid phone, and a small kitchen knife. It wasn't confirmed as the murder weapon, but lab analysis began immediately. During interrogation, Bechand was read his rights and provided counsel. He made no statement about Amanda's death, only acknowledging that he'd needed time away. The silence didn't surprise investigators. Most suspects facing second-degree murder charges don't volunteer details. What mattered was the evidence: his phone's route, his vehicle's data, and the forensic match between his movements and Amanda's final hours. As news of the arrest broke, Cohoes residents gathered at a small vigil outside Amanda's home. Candles lined the porch rail, the same spot officers had crossed 12 days earlier. For them, justice wasn't abstract. It was the restoration of a sense of safety, a reassurance that chaos could still be traced and contained. Even in a digital age, what caught Anthony Bechand wasn't just technology. It was the consistency of small details: a timestamp, a receipt, a decision to fuel up before disappearing. Investigators often say killers erase themselves in obvious ways, but it's the mundane acts that bring them back into focus. When Anthony Bechand was brought back to Albany County on September 27, 2025, the quiet of the Adirondack woods was replaced by the sterile light of an interview room. He didn't resist arrest, didn't speak during transport, and didn't ask for anyone. The detectives already knew the broad strokes of the case. What they needed was confirmation of motive, opportunity, and sequence. Interrogations in homicide cases aren't about immediate confessions. They're about structure, documented time, chain of evidence, and the measured pressure of facts. Detectives began with routine background questions: residence, employment, last contact with Amanda Rodriguez. Bechand answered briefly, citing that they'd argued a few days earlier, a statement easily disproved by Amanda's phone records, showing a call from his number less than an hour before her death. When confronted with that timestamp, he looked away but didn't respond. The investigators then moved to the forensic timeline. They showed still frames from the gas station footage, a map of the phone pings, and the digital mileage from his truck. Each data point anchored him to the route north. None of it was speculative. Each piece had been verified through subpoena and cross-referenced with state surveillance logs. Confronted with the evidence, Bechand requested counsel. The interview paused as procedure required. Outside the room, detectives continued working. They examined the knife recovered from his backpack. It matched the approximate dimensions of the wounds recorded in the autopsy, though lab confirmation would take days. They compared trace samples, checked for fingerprints or biological residue, and examined the sheath. The ME's report added one critical observation: the wounds were inflicted with consistent angle and force, indicating a deliberate act, not self-defense or accidental motion. In homicide analysis, intent separates levels of culpability. The consistency of the wounds, lack of forced entry, and silence of the camera painted a picture of premeditation, or at least controlled aggression. Bechand's decision to flee north instead of calling for help was another indicator. Investigators documented everything for the district attorney's office, knowing the next step would be grand jury review. For the community, the arrest had closed one chapter, but opened another. News outlets in Albany and Troy reported on the case daily, tracing the timeline from Amanda's home to the Forrest arrest. Friends described her as disciplined, private, dependable. Those words repeated across interviews, forming an image of someone whose routine had never included danger. The disconnect between that and the violence that ended her life made the case harder for residents to process. The district attorney held a brief press conference confirming the charge: second-degree murder, no bail. The statement was factual, restrained, and left no space for speculation. For Amanda's family, it wasn't closure, it was procedure. Justice moves in paperwork long before it reaches a verdict. The interrogation phase didn't produce a confession, but it didn't need to. Evidence had already spoken. What mattered now was preserving the chain of custody and ensuring that every element, the silent camera, the digital trail, the weapon, could survive courtroom scrutiny. Detectives had done their part. What came next would belong to the courts and the slow, deliberate language of law. Behind every headline, though, was a quieter truth. Violence like this doesn't come from nowhere. It builds in private, in arguments that never reach police reports, in decisions that seem small until they turn fatal. For investigators, that's the hardest part to explain. The tragedy is as procedural as the evidence that documents it. After the arrest, the pace of the investigation shifted from search to scrutiny. Every piece of evidence gathered in the previous 2 weeks was now under review, not for discovery, but for admissibility. The prosecution team, working out of Albany County, began assembling a sequence of proof that would hold up under cross-examination. Photographs of the scene, the phone records, the gas station footage, and the knife found in Bechand's backpack. Each had to be documented with a clear chain of custody, down to the signature and timestamp on the evidence log. Forensic specialists delivered their reports to the district attorney's office by early October 2025. DNA swabs taken from the knife revealed a partial match to Amanda Rodriguez, consistent with contact but insufficient for full profile confirmation. The absence of other foreign DNA suggested the weapon hadn't been handled by anyone else. Analysts also confirmed trace fiber transfer between Bechand's jacket and the carpet in Amanda's living room, another small but significant link. The autopsy findings became central to the prosecution's narrative. The medical examiner outlined that Amanda sustained multiple stab wounds, all delivered with uniform direction and force. There were no defensive injuries on her hands, implying she was caught off guard or unable to resist. Toxicology results ruled out any intoxicants in her system. The report painted a picture of deliberate, concentrated violence, one that prosecutors believed would demonstrate intent beyond a moment of rage. Meanwhile, defense counsel entered a plea of not guilty at the arraignment. The hearing lasted less than 15 minutes. The judge ordered Bechand held without bail, citing flight risk and the violent nature of the charge. The courtroom remained silent, except for the rustle of papers and the brief clatter of a pen as the judge signed the remand order. From that moment, the case moved toward grand jury review. Investigators met again to refine the narrative they would present to jurors. They mapped out the timeline, Amanda's final phone call, the matching vehicle route, and the 12 days Bechand spent hiding in the Adirondacks. Nothing speculative, nothing emotional, just a sequence of verifiable acts leading from the residence in Cohoes to the arrest site near Saranac Lake. Prosecutors knew jurors would respond not to theories but to clarity. Outside the courthouse, local media waited. The story of a woman killed by someone she trusted resonated far beyond Cohoes. It became a brief symbol of how ordinary homes can conceal fatal patterns. For neighbors, the lesson wasn't abstract. It was caution, sharpened by proximity. By the end of the first week of October, forensic retests confirmed that blood residue found on Bechand's shoe soles was genetically consistent with Amanda Rodriguez. It was the final link investigators needed to complete the evidentiary chain. From that point forward, the case ceased to be about search or speculation. It became about proof. The process from here would be slow: motions, hearings, expert testimony. But for detectives who had worked the case from the first day, this was the stage they trusted most. Facts, once scattered, were now aligned. The truth was documented in evidence, sealed, and ready to be argued before a jury. Behind every case file lies a single question: how did something so personal become so irreversible? In the quiet moments between paperwork and testimony, that's the question investigators still carried with them. By mid-October 2025, the case of State vs. Bechand reached its next decisive phase, the grand jury hearing. 12 residents of Albany County were summoned to determine whether enough probable cause existed to indict Anthony Bechand for the second-degree murder of Amanda Rodriguez. The district attorney's presentation followed the same linear, fact-based method investigators had refined for weeks. There were no theatrics, only timelines, photographs, and sworn statements. Detectives began with the digital record. The jurors saw location data charted minute by minute. Bechand's phone leaving Cohoes shortly after midnight, traveling north toward Saratoga, then vanishing as he entered a cellular dead zone in the lower Adirondacks. Next came forensic imagery. Close-range photographs of the carpet fibers matched through microscopic analysis to those taken from his jacket. Each visual was labeled, time-stamped, and signed by chain of custody officers. Nothing speculative, nothing repeated. The medical examiner testified next. In a calm, clinical tone, she explained the wound pattern and the absence of defensive injuries. Jurors were shown a diagram instead of autopsy photos, enough for comprehension, not sensationalism. The emphasis was on direction and consistency, each wound delivered with the same controlled motion, confirming intent. Then came the technical evidence. The knife. Forensic analysts confirmed that DNA recovered from the hilt matched Bechand's profile, while traces of Amanda Rodriguez's blood lined the edge. That pairing formed the backbone of the prosecution's argument. Jurors were told how the weapon was recovered, how it was sealed, and how every step followed New York evidence protocol. The explanation was deliberate, methodical, and built trust in process rather than emotion. When the defense was granted brief cross-question time, their argument leaned on context. They emphasized the lack of eyewitnesses and the partial nature of DNA matches early in testing, but the absence of contradiction in the data and the clear flight path into the Adirondacks overshadowed speculation. After 2 days of testimony and exhibits, the jury foreperson delivered a single, clear outcome: indictment confirmed. The courtroom remained quiet as the record clerk entered the ruling. The indictment moved the case toward trial in Albany County Supreme Court, where Bechand would stand formally charged. Outside, the press reported the decision as expected. For Amanda's relatives, it was another procedural milestone. Important, but not relief. Justice in homicide cases is rarely swift. It's a sequence of confirmations, each one replacing hope with paperwork. For investigators, the focus shifted again. Witness prep, expert scheduling, discovery compliance. Cases like this teach a sobering truth about modern investigations. Technology can reconstruct a person's last hours in detail, but it cannot explain why those hours ended the way they did. Behind every successful indictment lies a void no evidence can fill. Still, the record endures, ensuring that what happened in Cohoes that September night is preserved not as rumor, but as verified fact. In the weeks following the grand jury's indictment, the case of State v. Bechand entered a quieter, but no less crucial stage. The courtroom in Albany County grew familiar to the same detectives, attorneys, and clerks who had spent months unraveling what happened in Cohoes that September night. Anthony Bechand, held without bail, appeared for procedural hearings wearing a standard orange jumpsuit, his demeanor subdued. The defense filed predictable motions to suppress his statements, to question the chain of custody, but none of them altered the course already set in motion by the evidence. Each ruling reaffirmed the legitimacy of the investigation. The search warrants were sound, the digital records authentic, the forensic procedures airtight. For Amanda Rodriguez's family, these hearings were a painful march through bureaucracy. Her sister, seated in the back row at every session, often left before adjournment, unable to sit through the language of exhibits and stipulations that reduced her sister's life to documents and timestamps. Still, her presence was a silent statement that Amanda's memory would not be buried under legal formality. Around Cohoes, the case lingered as a symbol of both shock and reckoning. A small memorial outside Amanda's apartment was replaced by a plaque, funded by community donations, bearing her name and the words, "Seen, heard, remembered." The city council organized a local awareness campaign about domestic violence prevention, using this tragedy as a point of education rather than sensationalism. Officers who once worked the case spoke to students about recognizing early signs of danger, not as distant tragedy, but as something that can begin quietly in any neighborhood. In law enforcement circles, detectives use the case as a reminder of discipline over emotion. Every detail, from the first 911 call to the recovery of the murder weapon, was documented without shortcuts. It was that methodical approach, not instinct or luck, that brought a fugitive back from the Adirondacks to face accountability. Justice, they often said, is less about grand gestures and more about persistence, about refusing to let any file go cold. As the trial date approached, scheduled tentatively for early 2026, the district attorney's office continued refining its witness list and exhibits. There would be no plea bargain unless the defendant acknowledged guilt, something Bechand had yet to consider. Prosecutors prepared for a long trial, knowing that the weight of evidence might still not erase the grief in that courtroom. For the community, the story of Amanda Rodriguez became part of a larger conversation about vigilance, empathy, and resilience. She was not remembered solely as a victim, but as a reminder that violence often hides behind familiarity. Her life, ordinary in the eyes of the world but extraordinary to those who loved her, became a quiet testament to why truth must be pursued, even when it unfolds one hearing at a time. As of October 2025, the official record stands. Anthony Bechand remains in custody, charged with second-degree murder in the death of Amanda Rodriguez. The court awaits trial. There are no alternative endings, no hidden threads, only the long, deliberate path that justice in America demands. Justice, in the end, is not about speed. It is about clarity. It is the act of preserving the truth so it cannot be erased, even by time. When I look back on Amanda's story, I'm reminded how easily silence can hide danger and how vital it is to listen to the quiet warnings life gives us. Justice isn't just a courtroom word. It's the courage to stand up, to speak out, and to protect one another before tragedy strikes. If this story moved you, share what lesson you took from it or where you're watching from. I read every comment. And if you believe stories like these help us learn and heal, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next case. Together, we can turn awareness into action.